The ballroom glittered with extravagance. Crystal chandeliers bathed the guests in golden light, their shimmering reflections dancing across polished marble floors. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved swiftly between clusters of society's elite, carrying trays of champagne and delicacies that few outside this world would ever taste. Laughter echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling, a mixture of power, wealth, and vanity. But standing alone near the grand bar was Alexander Grant. To the world, he was the CEO of a billion-dollar empire, a man whose name alone could shift markets and silence boardrooms. His tailored black suit hugged his tall frame with perfection, his presence commanding respect even when he spoke no words. Yet beneath the flawless image, Alexander carried something no one else in the room seemed to notice: loneliness. He swirled the liquid in his glass absent-mindedly, watching bubbles rise and disappear. Parties like these were supposed to be networking opportunities, moments to strengthen alliances, secure future deals. But for Alexander, they were just another reminder of the emptiness in his life. Success had filled his bank accounts, yes. It had bought him mansions, cars, and luxury vacations. But it hadn't bought him warmth. It hadn't given him family. It hadn't silenced the ache he felt when he came home to a sprawling house that was silent and cold. His eyes swept the room, couples laughing, fathers twirling daughters on the dance floor, mothers holding their children close, businessmen joking with friends. For a fleeting second, Alexander envied them. Not their wealth, not their positions, but their connections. Their bonds. He exhaled a quiet sigh, setting his glass down on the polished counter. Just as he was about to leave, he felt it, a tiny tug at the edge of his sleeve. He turned, startled. Standing beside him was a little girl, no more than 6 years old. Her hazel eyes glimmered like curious lanterns, white and innocent, framed by long lashes. A pink ribbon sat lopsided in her hair, and in her small hand she clutched a teddy bear that had clearly seen better days, its fur worn, one button eye missing. For a moment, Alexander could only stare. Children weren't common at such lavish events, and certainly not ones who looked so ordinary, so out of place among gowns and jewels. "Mister," she whispered, her voice soft but certain. Alexander lowered himself slightly, unsure if she was even speaking to him. "Yes. You look sad." Her statement was direct, unfiltered, the kind only a child could make. He blinked. People rarely spoke of his emotions. They spoke of his power, his intelligence, his influence. But sadness, that was something he had buried deep, hidden behind the armor of his reputation. Yet here this little stranger stood, calling it out as though she had read his heart. His throat tightened. "Sad," he repeated, forcing a small smile. "What makes you think that?" The girl hugged her teddy closer. "Because I know what sad looks like. I feel it too, sometimes." The room seemed to fade around them, the music, the chatter, the laughter, all dulled into the background. Alexander crouched down until he was at her eye level. He studied her face, the innocence yet quiet wisdom that shone there. "What's your name?" "Emily," she said softly. "My mama calls me Em sometimes. But I don't have a papa." Her voice broke slightly, and the weight of her words hit Alexander like a punch to the chest. "My papa went to heaven," she continued, her hazel eyes glistening though she fought back tears. "Mama says he's watching me from the stars. But sometimes I wish I could have a daddy. Just for one night. So I don't feel alone in this big world." Alexander's heart ached in a way it hadn't in years. He had grown used to boardroom battles, cutthroat decisions, and the constant facade of strength. But this tiny voice broke through every defense he had built. He swallowed hard, the weight of her words reminding him of nights he too had stared at ceilings, wondering why life had given him everything except someone to belong to. He reached out carefully, brushing a stray curl away from her face. "Emily, I know what it's like to feel alone." Her lips quivered, and before he could react, she suddenly leaned forward, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Her teddy bear pressed between them, and her cheek rested against his shoulder. The hug was small, fragile, yet it carried a warmth that Alexander hadn't felt in years. Then came the words that shattered every last wall around his heart. "Then maybe," she whispered, her breath tickling his ear, "you can be my daddy forever." Alexander froze. His arms trembled as he slowly returned her embrace, holding her close though his mind spun in chaos. No one had ever asked him for something so pure, so unselfish, so real. He wasn't being asked for money, or power, or favors. He was being asked to fill a void in a child's heart, a void he understood all too well. His eyes stung. For once, Alexander Grant, the untouchable CEO, felt vulnerable. Human. Needed. But before he could find the words to respond, a voice cut through the moment. "Emily." It was soft, feminine, trembling with both panic and relief. Alexander looked up and saw her. A woman rushing toward them, her long brown hair slightly undone as though she had been searching frantically. She wore a simple evening dress, elegant but not extravagant, and her eyes, those warm, tired, yet fiercely protective eyes, immediately went to her daughter. "Sweetheart," she breathed, kneeling down and pulling Emily gently into her arms. "Don't run off like that. You scared me." Emily clung to her mother's neck, whispering something that Alexander couldn't hear. His gaze, however, lingered on the woman, her natural beauty, the faint lines of exhaustion that told of sleepless nights, and the strength in the way she held her child. She wasn't polished like the women who filled the ballroom with diamonds and pride. She was real. The woman finally looked at him, her expression flustered but polite. "I'm so sorry, sir." She must have wandered off. "I hope she didn't disturb you." Alexander's lips parted, but no words came. Disturb him? No. Emily had just shaken the very foundation of his life. He managed a small smile, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Not at all," he said quietly. "In fact, she reminded me of something I had forgotten." The woman tilted her head, puzzled by his words, but her attention was pulled back to Emily, who was still clinging to her. With one last apologetic glance, she started to guide her daughter away, murmuring something soothing. But Alexander's eyes followed them, his heart still pounding with the echo of Emily's voice. "Can you be my daddy forever?" And for the first time in years, Alexander Grant, feared, respected, untouchable, felt as though fate had just handed him a chance at the one thing his billions could never buy. The days after the gala blurred into restless nights for Alexander. He sat in his penthouse, surrounded by glass walls overlooking the city skyline, yet the view felt hollow. The lights of skyscrapers twinkled like stars, but none of them warmed him. His home was a palace of silence, every ticking clock echoing louder than his thoughts. And those thoughts always circled back to one moment. "Then maybe you can be my daddy forever." Emily's little voice replayed in his mind like a melody he couldn't silence. He had built empires, defeated competitors, and carried the weight of an entire corporation, but he couldn't stop thinking about one small girl with a teddy bear and her exhausted but beautiful mother. He needed to see them again. Through his network of contacts, Alexander discovered her name, Grace Miller. She wasn't a socialite, not an heiress, not a woman who belonged to the glittering circles he lived in. She worked as a waitress in a modest cafe downtown. Widowed young, she raised Emily alone, juggling bills, responsibilities, and motherhood with quiet resilience. She lived paycheck to paycheck, but never once faltered in giving her daughter love. Alexander was used to research. He could order entire files on people with a single command. But this was different. The more he learned about Grace, the more something stirred inside him, admiration, curiosity, and something even deeper he didn't dare name. One rainy evening, unable to resist any longer, Alexander's sleek black car pulled up outside the cafe. The glass door jingled softly as he entered. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread greeted him, warm and comforting. Unlike the gala's cold grandeur, this place radiated life. At a corner table, Emily sat with her teddy bear, coloring on napkins with stubby crayons. She looked up, and her face lit up. "Alexander!" she squealed, leaping from her chair and running to him. The entire cafe turned to stare. Alexander Grant, the man they only ever saw on business magazines, was kneeling down to hug a little girl with crayon-stained fingers. He held her tightly, smiling for real this time. Not the practiced smile of a CEO. A genuine one. Grace appeared from behind the counter, her tray nearly slipping from her hands. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Mr. Grant, please," he said, standing as Emily clung to his hand. "Call me Alexander." She hesitated, caught between suspicion and politeness. "Why are you here?" He glanced down at Emily, who was grinning up at him. Then back at Grace, whose guarded eyes carried years of unspoken struggles. "Because someone very important asked me for something," he said softly. Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" He crouched again to meet Emily's gaze. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. "Because she asked me to be her daddy forever. And I don't make promises I don't mean." Grace's breath caught. For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scold her daughter for speaking such words to a stranger. Her instincts screamed caution. Men didn't just walk into their lives to stay. Too many times she had seen promises fade, leaving only heartbreak. But when she looked at Alexander, she didn't see pity or arrogance. She saw sincerity. A man who had everything, yet looked at Emily as though she was the most precious treasure in the world. "Mr. Grant, Alexander," she said carefully, her voice trembling. "I appreciate your kindness, but Emily doesn't need empty words. She's just a child. Please don't." "I'm not here out of charity," Alexander interrupted gently. He looked directly at her, his eyes unflinching. "I'm here because she reminded me of something I've been missing all my life. And because when she hugged me, I felt like I belonged for the first time." Grace's chest tightened. She had heard many speeches in her life, mostly empty ones. But his voice carried truth. Emily tugged at her mother's dress. "Mama, can he, please?" Grace knelt, stroking her daughter's hair. She wanted to protect Emily from disappointment, from false hopes. But looking at Alexander, she wondered, was this man really who he seemed? Could he truly mean it? Her voice was quiet when she replied. "Alexander, we don't live in your world. I can't give you anything. No riches, no glamorous life. All I can offer is, us. And even that is messy." Alexander reached for her hand. His touch was firm, steady, grounding. "Grace, I've spent years surrounded by wealth and people who wanted something from me. But none of them ever asked me for what Emily did. She asked me for family. And that's all I want. With you. With her." Grace's eyes brimmed with tears she fought to hold back. She wasn't used to anyone choosing them, for love, not obligation. But Emily's face, glowing with hope, tilted the scales in her heart. That night, after the cafe closed, the three of them walked together under one umbrella. Emily skipped between them, holding both their hands, her laughter echoing through the rain-slicked streets. Grace stole glances at Alexander, wondering how fate had tangled their lives so suddenly. The weeks that followed were like a quiet miracle. Alexander returned often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to sit with Emily and listen to her chatter about school, crayons, and teddy bear adventures. For the first time, Grace saw her daughter bloom with a happiness she hadn't seen in years. And, slowly, she began to let her guard down. Alexander wasn't just a CEO to Emily. He was the man who helped her with homework, who clapped the loudest at her school recital, who carried her on his shoulders when she grew tired. He was patient, gentle, and fiercely protective. One evening, Emily fell asleep on the cafe sofa while coloring. Grace covered her with a blanket, then looked at Alexander, who sat nearby watching with quiet tenderness. She really loves you, Grace whispered. Alexander's gaze didn't leave Emily. And I love her. Like she's mine. Grace's breath trembled. Those words pierced her walls. But it wasn't just Emily. Alexander was slowly stealing her heart too. The man who had seemed untouchable was showing her a side that was vulnerable, human, and longing. When his eyes finally met hers, there was no hesitation in them. Grace, I don't want this to be temporary. I don't want to just visit. I want to build something. With both of you. If you'll let me. Tears slipped down Grace's cheeks before she could stop them. All the nights of struggle, the silent prayers whispered into the dark, the fears of raising a daughter alone, they all led here. To this moment. She nodded, her voice breaking. Yes. But only if you're here, not for riches, not for appearances, but for us. For real. Alexander took her hand, kissing it gently. For real. Always. Emily stirred in her sleep, her little voice murmuring as though she had heard everything. See, Mama, I told you, he can be my daddy forever. Grace pressed her forehead against Alexander's shoulder, her tears wetting his suit. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Grant, the lonely CEO who once had everything but love, finally had a family. And it all began with the courage of a little girl who dared to ask the question that changed everything.